Welcome to an all-new edition of Facing the Middle East that uncovers news in context. It's the place that takes you to people you want to know. On today's program, we hear how Israel is becoming the gateway to the world, even as it continues to wage war with Hamas. Retired Indian General Officer Satish Dua will join us. We'll speak with William Daroff, CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, and then Gol Kalev will walk us through his acclaimed new book, The Assault on Judaism. But first, this is on my mind. The world's eyes have been fixed on the weekly hostage release, parading the latest Israelis held in the midst of a perfectly planned propaganda spectacle. The stories, which have been slowly leaking, tell of unimaginable torture, deprivation of food and hygiene, and unspeakable mental abuse. That Hamas is still exuding strength and upper hand, able to print sophisticated backdrop banners as part of their weekly campaign and message to the world is astonishing, given the fact that Israel has demolished so much of Gaza. They're freely driving through the streets, staking their territorial marks, and have maintained a strategic and significant hold in Gaza, including tunnels and infrastructure. As incomprehensible as this may be, the most startling of all is the fact that hundreds of kids have been seen flocking around these terrorists. Many young children who barely are in kindergarten and grade school hold guns, and they're dressed as terrorists. These are Hamas's latest recruits, and it is precisely these inhumane, sadistic, and illegal actions that should be bringing an outcry from both political leaders and the public alike. It should resonate as a reminder that Hamas is a terrorist organization, that Israeli and foreign hostages released are not, and that the price Israel has paid for the freedom of each hostage has been unequal. In this exchange, the prisoners, many with blood on their hands, are being released into Israel. One can only hope they won't be repeating these same crimes again. That Hamas was given Gaza in 2005 when Israel withdrew from one of its most beautiful and lucrative areas and turned it into an enclave of hate is horrific. It should remind each and every one of us that Hamas lacks morals, validates its terrorist label, and uses and abuses its children. They've created the evil we all witnessed on October 7th, and every Hamas member should be tried at the International Criminal Court. We live in a world where too many rely on misinformation. These are facts. These scenes are put on proudly by Hamas Incorporated. They aren't AI, and certainly not fake news. But this is my opinion, which I feel must be shared with each and every one of you.
Do you trust your news sources? Are you tired of one-sided reporting? You need to know the Media Line to know the Middle East.
The world needs news you can trust.
The Media Line's reporters are in the streets of Cairo, Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Sana'a, bringing you stories in context which shape your views and decisions. The Media Line is the first independent, non-profit American news agency covering the Middle East. It's the best-kept secret in the news business. Discover for yourself why the Media Line is relied upon by government officials and media outlets worldwide.
Bringing you the stories which impact your lives.
Support the trusted Mideast news source today by going to themedialine.org. You need to know the Media Line to know the Middle East.
Now in our 25th year, your support matters. A retired general who was a hero in the Indian Army. Retired General Officer Satish Dua was in Israel recently. He's a counterterrorism expert and served as the Chief of Integrated Defense Staff to the Chairman of Chiefs of Staff Committee of the Indian Armed Forces. There has been much cooperation between Israel and India. The Drishti-10 Starliner drone, for example. India has learned from Israel quite a bit regarding this type of warfare. How will Israeli-Indian military cooperation shift in the coming decade?
There has been a very active cooperation between the forces of two countries and also our defense production. So we have been acquiring weapons and equipment from Israel to fill up our critical voids, wherever we have voids. Not only that, you mentioned a couple of examples. I remember when I was a colonel and we were on the line of control a couple of decades, 3 decades ago, and that is the time when we got our first handheld thermal imagers, which we use. So they came from here. So what I'm trying to say that we have had a very active cooperation, and I think the best measure of our support and trust in each other is the fact that there have been a couple of times when we needed something very critically, very urgently because of the operational situation. In fact, a conflict was ongoing and Israel came to our help. So, sometimes it takes, there are long gestation periods to actually get defense equipment and weapons and ammunition. But when we needed it, we got it in real quick time. So in the future, and I'm sure that India and Israel will only enhance their cooperation in the new emerging fields, especially in the world of cyber and space. Here, Israel has a lot of strengths. India also has some strengths in the software skills, but in the cyber world, the Israeli capabilities are fairly unmatched, and we look forward to cooperating in that.
How do you teach young people who join the Indian military about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? How do you explain to them what Israel has had to deal with in the current war?
As a young officer, I have been brought up as a part of our professional military education. I have been brought up reading about the Six-Day War, the wars that Israel has fought with Egypt, Jordan, and other countries over here, and the Yom Kippur War. So the point I'm trying to make is not only I have been brought up on that, it used to be a part of our curriculum. During my younger days, when you are promoted from a captain to to the rank of a captain, and then from captain to a major, you have to pass a certain qualification exam. And in that exam, military history is a subject, and these are the subjects that we used to read. So all our youngsters who join, these are the campaigns that we've actually read about, and that is how there is a great deal of awareness, especially amongst the Indian Army officers, about what has been the military history of Israel.
Narratives have changed. Do you feel that the India of today understands Israel differently from how it was understood by the India of yesteryear?
Yes, narratives have changed. Today, Israel is also battling the non-state actors much more than it is battling a neighboring country. And similarly, India is also now in a continuous combat mode with the non-state actors that Pakistan supports, nurtures, and actually exports out to in our country to spread violence. So times have changed, narratives have changed, but just a coincidence, maybe this is happening all over the world, that both our armies, that is India and Israeli army or armed forces, are involved in combating the same scourge. So there is again a lot of give and take. We do exercises together. We have joint exercises with Israeli Defense Forces. We have, of course, the most of our cooperation is in the field of in army and in the Air Force. So in these two forces, we are actively doing joint exercises. We have regular exchanges. Our delegations go and learn from each other. And of course, we've already spoken about the military hardware and the software that we are taking assistance from Israel for.
Have you been to Israel before?
Yes, I have. Though it was many years ago, and I came here as a part of an official delegation, so it was a very good interaction to interact, I recall, with the National Defense College of Israel. Then we had an interaction with the National Security Council. One of the council members, we had an interaction with him, and several other places. Must also say that I also visited other parts of Israel where it was very nice to learn about the Gaza border, because we have similarities in India-Pakistan border. Because the way the terrain is, though our terrain is much higher mountainous terrain, but the similarities of a porous border and terrorists getting across using the sensors. We actually use sensors that we actually procured from Israel. We also use the same in our border fencing, etc. So that is the kind of experiences that enrich us. And I personally have, firsthand, I have seen how it works over here.
You are here at an unusual time, a 6-week period when there is an exchange of hostages held by Hamas for Palestinian prisoners, some of whom have blood on their hands, and not one for one, but 50 or more terrorists for one hostage. How would you have handled a situation like this?
I think there are no easy answers to the question you pose. It is always a very tough call to make, because you want to save the lives of your citizens. When you say the ratio is 1:50 or more, what price can you really put at a human life? It's very tough. Tough decisions have to be made by political leaders. I mean, it's, sorry for using this phrase, but it's damned if you do and damned if you don't situation. We in India have faced a similar problem. We've had an aircraft was hijacked in 1999, taken to Kandahar in Afghanistan, and we were told to release a few dreaded terrorists languishing in our jails, in our prisons. One of them, Masood Azhar, eventually formed the Jaish-e-Mohammed, whose signature tactics is suicide squads, and they've started perfecting that technology, and they've harmed not only India, even Pakistan and other places. So what I'm trying to say is that it's a tough call that Israel has had to make. In the last 1 week, we saw there have been 2 prisoner exchanges. The beginning has been made. Some hostages were released, and more number of criminals or terrorists have had to be released. And I gather if it continues, there'll be more. So such situations are messy. It will eventually may lead to some other developments where these criminals will go back and try to perpetrate more such violence.
News needs trained journalists. The Media Line, the first American nonprofit news agency covering the Middle East, has mentored scores of students from prestigious American universities and around the globe. We are one of the best kept secrets. Universities are partners. Students receive credit. In order to bring you trusted news, we need support for our future journalists. Please make your tax-deductible gift today. Go to themedialine.org.
I've just come back from a historic visit to Washington with President Trump. I can categorically say that I don't think there was any more consequential meeting of a prime minister and a president than this meeting, because we are reshaping the Middle East. And there I have to say that President Trump has presented a bold new vision, and the only plan that I think can work to enable a different future for the people of Gaza, for the people of Israel, for the surrounding areas. Why not give Gazans a choice?
I applaud President Trump for getting involved and engaged in issues surrounding the future of Gaza and the day after the conflict for Gaza. I think that his ideas are ones that have really spurred a great deal of interest and engagement, particularly in the Arab world, where we see the King of Jordan agreeing to take in 2,000 Palestinian patients, children from Gaza and their families. We saw the UAE ambassador to the United States note that it was a novel idea and really the only idea that's out there. And we understand that President Sisi in Egypt is also working on a plan. Before President Trump's engagement here, none of those players were engaged, and I think that it's positive for the region to have the United States involved. Now, will the final disposition of Gaza be what President Trump presented at that press conference? I doubt it, but the conversation has changed, and I think that's a positive.
Everybody said this is the largest open-air prison in the world. Not because of us. We let people leave. In fact, if you want to know, over the last couple of years, 2 years I think, 150,000 Gazans left. You know how they left? Because they bribed their way out, not to us. They bribed their way out. The rich could leave. But if other people wanted to leave, give them a choice. Not forcible eviction, not ethnic cleansing. In a war zone, people leave. We try to get the population to leave, to get them out of harm's way in Hamas with rifles, with gunfire, try to prevent them from leaving. So we moved them around so that they would get out of harm's way. But if people want to leave, if they want to emigrate, it's their choice. And I think President Trump's plan is right on the dot. It's the right plan.
And on the one hand, we see President Sisi saying that they won't take any Gazans. On the other hand, we know that over 150,000 Gazans have made their way from Gaza into or through Egypt. And we know that President Sisi is working on a plan, again, a plan that he wasn't working on before President Trump engaged here. So I think the final answer here will be different than how it looks now, but I think it's good that there's a new breeze blowing of ideas, not just from America and Israel, but from throughout the Middle East.
Gol Kalev is a Herzl aficionado. He has authored several books which speak to Israel's right to exist, and his latest tackles existential threats facing the Jewish state and Jewry at large. Thank you, Gol, for joining me here at the Media Line to discuss your new book, The Assault on Judaism.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Open your book with the premise that the West has the capability of eradicating Israel. As an example, you speak of the International Criminal Court. And here, how can they arrest Israeli citizens? Is it that simple?
Well, the ICC assault is in multiple layers. Of course, there's the obvious layer in which they can issue arrest warrants, and they already have done that. They've issued arrest warrants against the Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister, and they've set out the legal framework to arrest all Israeli soldiers because they said explicitly that those crimes that they accused us of doing were committed by others. But there's other layers to the ICC assault. One is that it creates a demoralization effect. Another is that it can create a paralyzing effect because Israelis are not going to travel. And another one is that it gives credibility to other arenas in the assault on Judaism. As I mentioned in the book, the assault on Judaism is expanding rapidly and fast and going arena to arena to arena, and one arena feeds off in the other. So when the ICC, a credible institution, perceived to be a credible institution, is certifying that once again Jews have been done throughout the century are doing those horrible things, deliberate starvations of others, committing crimes against humanity, others can take actions against the Jews through the Jewish state as well.
When you look at the last year, you see a rise in anti-Semitism, virtually indistinguishable from anti-Israel behavior against Israelis and Jews. Can you differentiate between the two?
Yes, I think that the anti-Semitism action that we are seeing are a symptom of something that's much bigger that's happening, and that is the attempt to negate the idea of the Jewish state and through it the idea of Judaism. Opposition to Judaism always follows the most relevant aspect of Judaism. In our era, the most relevant aspect of Judaism is Zionism and the Jewish state, and therefore age-old opposition to Judaism and violence against Jews is a derivative of that.
It doesn't impact me, the Jew married a non-Jew, the rest of the world who is not Jewish. Why does it really matter, Gol?
It matters because the assault on Judaism is not just an assault on Judaism. As I explain in the book and in the briefings I've had in the United States, it is also a proxy for an assault on Americanism, and therefore it needs to be treated in a national security context. The assault on Judaism is a national security threat to the United States. The ICC that we've just spoke about is a perfect example. Secretary Rubio, in his confirmation hearing, said it explicitly, that the ICC indictments against Israel are just a practice run to indict American servicemen and political leaders. And therefore it is imperative for the United States to take action against the ICC, because otherwise it's going to come right in the United States and then to other Western countries.
Israel bashers within. The outsider often witnesses an Israel divided. The judicial reforms as an example, whether to end the war with Hamas versus getting the hostages back, and of course how a Jew is defined. Has this been a factor in breaking Israel as one nation?
I think this is the perception from the outside, but in reality, we are a very, very together, united country. I mean, all those things you mentioned did not result in large-scale violence or even like separation of friendships or relationships. We argue very passionately, but as we've seen after October 7th, there is no this type of politics or divisions inside the tank. We are one nation, we love each other, and therefore we have the confidence and the security to fight our differences in a very passionate and loud way.
But also looking at those that are not with Israel, looking at the outside world. You have enemies of Israel, and then you have those that just don't agree with the way Israel is handling things.
Criticism of Israel, of course, should be welcomed and protected, but that criticism have quickly turned into an obsessive onslaught against our right to exist, and we see it in nuanced and layered ways. I mentioned we saw it in Congress during the confirmation hearing of Felice Friedson. One of the senators, a prominent senator, a mainstream senator, basically questioned Israel's biblical right to exist, which derives the legal right to exist. So we have criticism is fine, but this criticism of long time ago have turned into a fashion of obsessively negating Israel's right to exist.
President Biden made headlines by saying don't. But 6 months later, the story was very different. Gal, what was happening, and what does this tell the world?
Well, this is exactly what we talked about, that the assault on Judaism from the West is layered and done by friends and foes alike. It is reflective of what I think the Biden administration assumed, that there is a broad global opinion against the Jewish state, and that's no surprise because the Western media had indoctrinated this global opinion against the Jews, just as they've done in the previous centuries. They've done it now.
You recently met with President Trump. Do you think that President Trump is going to allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to continue the war with Hamas, even though he has said over and over, emphatically, that the war needs to end?
Well, I think even the biggest pundits and journalists do not know what transpires in closed meetings between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu and other world leaders. And I think the best that we should do is pray that God bestows those two leaders with good advice.
One of the big questions is whether Israel will go ahead and attack Iran, whether America will join in quietly or not. But the real issue here is how that shapes public opinion, something that you do talk about. And this will lead to more assaults on the Jewish state. What's your take?
Look, we have to recognize that the world doesn't like war, and that's a natural thing. So if Israel attacks Iran, people will, don't necessarily view the context of this attack, and we have to prepare. And as I've said it in the book and in my articles, for a prolonged period in which the Western mindset will be non-supportive of Israel, because we are accused of starting wars.
The United Nations did not initially acknowledge the fact that there were violations against Israelis, horrific violations on October 7th. And here we're faced with the issue of creating a path for other nations to attack. You address this quite deeply in the book that you just wrote, and important to understand what are the ramifications.
Yeah, the ramifications is that Israel's ability to act is much more limited. There is an ideological assault on the Jewish state, and there is a physical assault. Those two are autonomous, but they feed off each other. Hamas knew on October 7th that when they attack us, they'll have the Western media at one point or another trying to stop Israel. That was what happened in all previous rounds. So they didn't coordinate with them, but the fact that there is this sort of instinctive reaction to assault the Jewish state and says, you're attacking Gaza, you're the one who's creating war. You're attacking Iran, you're the one who's creating war, creating this public pressure. And therefore the ramification is that at one point we need to stop and be less safe. And the other side knows that, so their propensity to attack is higher.
Some of the big issues right now are whether the concept that President Trump has rolled out about Gazans going back to Jordan, moving back, whether temporarily or not, to Egypt, is it feasible? How this plays out. How is the world looking at this? Because it all relates, Gal, to the issue of the attacks on Israel.
Absolutely. You know, Felice, it's funny because for 80 years, the UN, the EU, a lot of people in the West told people in Gaza, you are not from Gaza. You're from Tel Aviv, you're from Herzliya. They created this entity, UNRWA, whose purpose is to perpetuate that narrative that you are not from Gaza. You are one day going to go back to Tel Aviv, to Ashkelon, to Jerusalem, to Herzliya. And now that Trump is suggesting that you should leave Gaza, all of a sudden those same people are saying, oh, no, you are from Gaza, so which one is it? And Felice, some of the people link the whole notion that why were the people in Gaza were not allowed to leave? And some people it's said that, well, this is to promote this Western concept of the two-state solution, which is sacred in Western policy circle, in the State Department, in the EU, in the UN, but it's not an organic Middle Eastern concept. I mean, I don't hear Palestinian talk about from the river to the Green Line, so the West Bank will be free. These are not the jargons of the Palestinians. And to have a Palestinian state, you need Palestinians. And some people are saying that, well, this is the reason why the West would not allow the Palestinians to leave Gaza, because you're needed there for the two-state solution, for the Western idea of a two-state solution. So again, here the Palestinians are an ancillary victim of the Western assault on Judaism.
The Assault on Judaism, and really interesting read, a good book for everybody to pick up. And thank you so much for joining us here at the Media Line.
Thanks for having me.
Do you trust your news sources? Are you tired of one-sided reporting? You need to know the Media Line to know the Middle East.
The world needs news you can trust.
The Media Line is the first independent, non-profit American news agency covering the Middle East. It's the best-kept secret in the news business. Support the trusted Mideast news source today by going to themedialine.org.
Thank you for joining us on this edition of Facing the Middle East, where we unlock the hidden truths of the world's most contentious region. We encourage you to read and share our stories produced by our seasoned journalists throughout the Middle East, and invite you to learn what journalism is truly about. Go to themedialine.org for news you need to know and trust.
Trusted news needs trained journalists. The Media Line, the first American non-profit news agency covering the Middle East, has mentored scores of students from prestigious American universities and around the globe.
A lot of what we miss at home is context, a real sense of how complicated the issue can be here. And I don't think it's something that you really learn until you spend a lot of time here.
Who study the profession of journalism with accuracy.
When everybody is talking about fake news, it's really important to have factual-based reporting. Here at the Media Line, that's what they do.
We are one of the best-kept secrets relied on by governments and media. Universities are partners and students receive credit. In order to bring you trusted news, we need support for our future journalists. Please make your tax-deductible gift today. Go to themedialine.org.
Now in our 25th year, your support matters.